enjoy as much as this, and I wouldn't miss it. And I hope you all feel that way as well. And I am so blessed to hear the speakers, and it's really these are men of God, and it's in some ways it's difficult to be up here and follow them, because a characteristic of so many of them is a grace and a humility, a desire to not have the attention themselves, but to turn the attention onto the Lord, so that people see the works of that, or they hear what's happening in nations, and their eyes are up where they belong, and not in any person. Isn't that wonderful? So anyway, so I'm blessed to be here with you all. I'm Joe Infranco. I'm an attorney with a ministry called Alliance Defending Freedom. Probably many of you know it. For those who don't, it was launched in 1994 by a large group of evangelical leaders, including people like Dr. Dobson, Dr. Bill Bright, Dr. D. James Kennedy, many more. They were looking about the loss of our freedoms in this country, the erosion of religious liberty. And they conceived of the idea of, now it's called Alliance Defending Freedom. We're the largest of what we do, not only in the nation and the world. We have international efforts as well. I'm just going to focus on the U.S. efforts today, though. I have the great privilege and blessing of overseeing a network of 3,300 what we call allied attorneys, and they do pro bono work for the body of Christ. They have done, easily over, if we were valuing over $250 million worth of legal work for the body of Christ, in the time that I've been there. Before that, I practiced in New York, and I sounded more like I was from New York once upon a time and quoted The Godfather all the time. But I don't sound like New York no more. I forget, I lost that accent. You can't tell where I'm from originally. All right. And so we do have a large legal staff. A focus now is on what God has been so good to us at the Supreme Court. We've had 9 cases at the U.S. Supreme Court in the last 8 years for religious liberty. By God's grace, we've won all 9 at the Supreme Court. Yeah. And the leading independent Supreme Court blog in the nation identified us as the most successful advocates on First Amendment religious issues in the nation. And so I want to talk a little bit about those cases, but I also want to give a little perspective so that you get this, because there's been a lot of talk, and I think it's well-founded and necessary, about this dichotomy, the ministry-work dichotomy. And I just want to say that that's very much a part of these cases, because a lot of the cases we are dealing with, and I'll mention a few of them, and some of them I think you'll recognize, deal with a view where government wants to minimize faith in your life and in the workplace. And they have a view that if your faith is taking place in the sort of the 4 walls of this church, we'll put, lie on the outside and quarantine you, and we'll let you say whatever you want to inside those walls. But don't ever let that get out, and as Jason was talking about, and infect public policy. This is the view that they have. I think it's perfectly represented in, there's a Nietzsche novel called, back in the bad old days when I used to think and read about such things, called Thus Spoke Zarathustra, where there's an old kind of a hermit. He's sort of a religious guy living out in the woods in a cabin, and he hasn't heard the message yet that God is dead. And the people in the story, they want to go and let him know that God is dead. Let's fill him in on this. And the reply to that is, no. You know what? He's not doing any harm. Let him have his delusion. Let him live alone in his cabin. There's no harm. That's the view of faith that they're okay with. They'll talk about religious liberty, but it's a religious liberty. It's an idea that if your faith is contained in the walls and it does not influence the way that you live, and it does not influence the culture, then that's okay. We can put up with that. It's similar to what happened in Germany. It seems like it's inevitable. You can't talk too long without getting a Nazi illustration. That's just how it works. But I think it's so important, because when the National Socialists came into Germany, they could not close down churches initially, because the German culture had a long connection with Lutheran and Catholic churches. So instead, the National Socialist Party, the Nazis, started a gradual tightening of the screw. And they said, you can remain a church so long as you never contradict the teachings of National Socialism. And so when the National Socialist Party came up with these abhorrent views of, racial superiority and seizing the property of Jews and executing mentally deficient persons, if a church could not sign a pledge that said, we will never contradict your views because that's politics, oh, well, we're not going to go into politics, we'll just talk about Jesus. How much Jesus is left after the state starts executing unfit people and kills 6 million Jews? And in the end, that's what you had to do in order to be a church. And that's the view that's coming. But I want to talk about the marketplace, because the strongest focus of attack is on participation in the marketplace, because we are hearing the government say to Christians, if you don't follow the government orthodoxy, you will not be permitted to be in the marketplace. And when they want to talk about religious freedom, they'll say, we'll concede it to a church. The pastor can marry whomever he wishes. If he doesn't want to do same-sex weddings, that's okay. But what happens in the marketplace, you have to conform with the new government orthodoxy. And if you don't, we will put you out of business. And you'll hear from the clients we have, when they go after them, they pursue draconian, harsh penalties that will bankrupt people, that will put them out of business. And why? Because they want them to be an example. So others look and say, I am afraid to do that because I don't want to lose my 401k in my home. I mean, God is God, but hey, my 401k, that's something else, But this is what happens. And I just want to say, a lot of when we talk about this being in the church, I think a lot of this has seeped into the church from the culture. We are in the culture, and the culture views it that way. That's what the drumbeat that they're hearing. You want to be religious, go and do it in your church and do it there, but don't bring this thing at you. Don't push your values on me, and other non sequiturs that are easily answered. And I wish there was time to go into that. But so that's what happens. I think this is an important thing for us to remember. We live in the culture, but we don't want to be of the culture. We don't want to be of the age, the aeon. We're not of that. We're in the world, we're in the cosmos, we're in the world system, but we're not of the world system, and our values have to be different. We have to stand out in a way that people see we are different. Can we function in high, important positions in the government? Of course. Can we do that in business? Of course. But are there times we have to take a stand and say, no further? Yes. You can have somebody like the prophet Daniel, who was high up in government and trusted, and he had all kinds of administrators put under him. But when the decree came from the king, who granted was tricked into this, that, for 30 days nobody can make any petition of any god or man, that was not going to work. He went to his window where people could see him. He faced Jerusalem because he was interceding for the nation and the restoration of the Jewish people. And he got on his knees and he prayed. When 3 Hebrew children were in the plain of Dura, and the command from the king came, and they were trusted. These were the cream of the crop of Israel. These were the prime young men who had been brought and taught in the king's ways. And when the order came from Nebuchadnezzar, when the instruments play, you see that big old gold statue, you bow down. And that was a thing they could not do. They could be in that culture, but there had to be lines that were drawn. And this is a challenge for us as believers, isn't it? That we're always in the culture. It's like you're swimming in water. Well, you can't help it. Some of it gets into you. Your feet get dirty, and we need our feet washed and reminders of who we are and what we are. But boy, it's easier for the culture to get in and subtly affect our views. You know something? I've never watched Game of Thrones. I don't care who wins Game. There's one throne I care about, and I know who sits on it. But I've never watched it. I'm amazed how many Christians I know spend lots of time talking about this in the latest episode and all. I don't know. I'm not trying to pick. I'm just giving an example. There's more that gets in. It's got to be that nothing in the culture, nothing in our work, nothing in our job, nothing is more important than Jesus. But we have to take that with us into what we go, because and we want the culture to see what the faith looks like in economics, Dennis Peacock, what it looks like when you take care of families, what it looks like in real life. When my wife comes home and she says to me, she's in a high-risk OBGYN practice, another day, woman, look at this patient here, 4 kids by 3 men, drug addicted, When people on the other side of the debate are yelling out, what that woman needs is free birth control. I'll tell you something. I don't think, if you had a chance to talk to that woman and really hear her heart and see what God wanted for her, I don't think she'd say birth control, free birth control. I think she'd say, I wish the man who was the father of that baby loved me and committed to me, and that we had a marriage that looked like how Christ loved the church, and he was a father to our children. That's really what I wish that I had. But what happens is those women give up on that hope. Why? Because the world batters them down and they don't think it's available. I talk to young men in the world sometimes, and they're drinking up and they're sleeping around. You know something? We get time to talk and address the empty hole in the heart. And I say to them, you know what? I've been faithful to my wife. I'm going to end a commitment to my wife. Be a father to my children are proud of. Be a grandfather to my grandkids who they're proud of. Have a commitment before God. You know something? I see that in the eyes. There's something like, I've never heard this. This is something I want. Is this real? Can this happen? Because that's what Christian solutions look like. And goodness, I'm eating up my time on this. All right. So so bad ideas, though, have bad consequences in the world, and that gets put into bad laws. There was a revolution just under 250 years ago that was struck for freedom that is not well understood. No, I'm not talking about the American Revolution. I'm talking about the French Revolution, which was fought on a different concept with different views. It elevated the laity. The idea was we want God out. Churches were closed. Priests were in prison or even killed. They had some interesting ideas, like they didn't want a 7-day week. You know why? They didn't want the idea of a Sabbath. They were going to change to a 10-day work week to poke their thumb in the eye of the God they didn't believe in. They'd go into little villages. They'd get a young woman, put her on a cart, dress her up, and they'd say, this is the goddess of reason. We now worship the goddess of reason. And the French Revolution ended very badly, even for the People's Committee, who were the new source of power, because this is something that was important. It underlies all these cases. Whenever anybody says to you, I have a right to do this, the right question in response to that is, who or what gives you that right? My grandkids have a right to come and see me and interrupt me anytime they want to. They have the right of grandchildren. But when you talk about a right, there's 2 places a right can come from. We can have rights because they come from God, and then all the implications of what it means to be created in the image and likeness of God follow. It defines life. It defines how we live. It defines property. It defines how we view others. Or if there's no God, if Nietzsche's right, then rights come from the state. They come from government. And they are as good as the current administration. And when there's a new sheriff in town, well, you might not like the new set of rules and all that. And that's when the founders of this nation had the idea that it was a repudiation of the French model. So Jefferson, not among the most devout, says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. The source of rights was God. There was an authority higher than the state, higher than the government. And that is intolerable to a government orthodoxy that says, we're the ones who decide your rights, and when you don't agree with us, you have to be silenced or put in jail or done or whatever. Because we cannot bear the idea that there can be a conscience that's informed by a higher authority and that you have rights where we are not in the supreme position. And this is what's behind all of our cases, and it gets in the marketplace. So, for example, we had 2 wins this year at the Supreme Court. One was Jack Phillips' Masterpiece Bake Shop. Jack Phillips is a cake artist in Colorado. He serves anybody. He serves everybody. And let me say, the Christian clients we have, I have never once met one who says, you know what, I don't want to serve adulterers or gays or this kind of sinner in my hardware store. I won't sell them a hammer and nails. It's ridiculous. We all in business, we serve everybody. We do those things. But there are times that demands may be made of us that violate our conscience. How many of you here are pastors or in ministry? Yeah, okay, so if somebody came to you and said, well, I don't want this person coming into your church. Why? Because they're a sinner. You'd say, you've got a mixed up concept here. That's number one, we're all sinners. Number two, it's exactly who we want in the church so we can understand the grace of God. But then if they said to you, okay, that's true, let's invite the sinners in and let's make them feel welcome so you'll do a same-sex wedding, right? Well, no, you would say, no. There's a difference. We love and respect all people. And we all know, and it's a crowd of mature people, we don't have to say this, there's no place for that hateful rhetoric. The other side loves the caricature. They think they find the one kook somewhere who screams out those things. We really love all people. All people have an inherent dignity because we're made in the image and likeness of God. That naturally flows from the fact that we're created by God. So there's a consistency in this, and there's a consistency in love, wanting the best for that person in the model of what God created them to be, to minister to the human heart, to the piece of the heart that Blaise Pascal said is missing, is in the shape of God. So there are things that you cannot do. So our cake artist at the Supreme Court, there were certain convictions he had. There were cakes he wouldn't do. He wouldn't do cakes that were obscene. He wouldn't do cakes that were racist. He had a conviction against Halloween cakes. That was just his conviction. He would serve anybody who walked in. Yes, he had, gay and lesbian customers, but he would not create a cake to celebrate a same-sex wedding. He would not use the artistic skills that God had given him to celebrate an event that violated his conscience. Now, would every artist have made the same cake, Christian cake art have made the same? I don't know. The important thing was, it was for him. Before God, as he is answerable to God, if a man esteems a thing as a sin, Scripture says, then to him it is a sin. It becomes a sin. And we have to help protect him in his conscience. And so when he won that case at the Supreme Court, glory to God, then what happened was a local activist, for whom I want to remember to pray, turned around and asked, first he asked, no, yes, you want, did somebody comment on that? You want to pray for, we always pray for these other people. We have good relationships. I like that when we were attacked publicly as an organization that we're, some nonsense, if we believe in traditional marriage, we're anti-gay or lesbian. I'm really proud of the fact that a former president of the ACLU, Nadine Strassen, came out on our behalf and said, no, these are honest, good, decent, respectable attorneys. They've got views. Or I have an odd friendship with a fellow named Mikey Weinstein, and he calls the relationship the wormhole, but he's been public about it lately. We don't agree on any issue under the sun, but he publicly came out and he said, these attorneys are friends of mine. They are honorable, they are intelligent, they're this, they're that. I have a relationship with them, and it's wrong to call them these names. Because the other side often tries to shut down the debate. How? By name calling. And so Jack Phillips was attacked again. This time the request was for a transgender celebration cake. It was pink on the inside, blue on the outside. And the Colorado Commission was going to go after him again. And we ended up this time being able to sue Colorado, and they finally waved the white flag, though apparently now the individual may be trying to file his own lawsuit. Or a second case we had at the Supreme Court, a win, was the NIFLA case. NIFLA is a series of pregnancy centers. They are pro-life Christian pregnancy centers. The state of California, that bastion of conservatism now, passed a law saying Christian pregnancy centers, you have to advertise our message for abortion. When women come in, we think it's important women know these rights. Instead of just trying to convince them of whatever you're talking about, if you're this type of center, you have to actually hand them a card with a phone number and say to them, you should know that you have a right to an abortion. If you can't afford one, the state can help finance it or something. Now, do they ever say to Planned Parenthood, you have to give out a card saying there's Christian pregnancy crisis centers and adoption agencies. You might not want to consider abortion. You might want to. No, of course not. That never happens. And happily, the Supreme Court struck down that law. But this is the essence of it. And oh gosh, I wish there's time. We had a win at the Supreme Court a few years back over prayer. And that was, the case was called Town of Greece versus Galloway, where the ACLU argument was, okay, if you have to have prayer before a meeting, a government meeting, it must be something that sounds like this: to whom it may concern, if he, she, zir wants to listen, and all that. And we said, no. People should be allowed to pray according to their tradition and beliefs, as long as they fit the Supreme Court guidelines. You're not proselytizing and you're not disparaging another religion. This was unacceptable, and the Supreme Court, praise God, went the right way on this. And I'm just going to give one more case, and then I know you're coming up because I don't want to run out of time. But I think this really hits it. And I'm not going to get to talk about the case the Supreme Court just accepted cert on. I have to decide which way to go. Yeah, can we take a few minutes of Q&A? Okay. The Supreme Court just accepted review of one of our cases that I think may be the most important case that I've seen in the time that I've been there. And that is federal law. The Federal Civil Rights Act, enacted in 1964, says you cannot discriminate on certain bases. And one of the bases you cannot discriminate on is sex. What did Congress mean in 1964 when it passed that? It meant sex, meaning you can't treat women less favorably than men. And that was imported into, for example, women's sports, Title IX, where women get equal scholarships and all of these things. Well, the other side, unhappy with the pace of change, started bringing cases saying, when the word sex appears in federal law, sex means not only biology, it means sexual orientation and gender identity. Now, the idea that Congress might have intended that in 1964 is an absurdity. Of course it meant only biology, but they're trying to get ahead of the curve by having the courts force this issue. And so the Supreme Court granted this case. We have one of the cases granted. Our client is a Christian who owns a funeral home. He's in the marketplace. He exercises his faith to grieving people. When an employee of his came in and said, I'm starting my transition to a woman, and initially what you do is you just wear a woman's outfit. You don't start right away, and the way they do it with the hormones and the surgery and all that. And the owner of this funeral home said, no. I'm dealing with grieving families, and many of them families of faith. I'm not going to have you sitting here in a dress. And that's a distraction. You want to be here. What you do in your own time is your business, but you're wearing a black suit like everybody else when you come here. And the EEOC, the federal government's arm that prosecutes discrimination cases, launched a new campaign and made him the target. I remember meeting with him for the first time right after this happened. It was a national campaign. Gender identity is now protected. Your gender is whatever you perceive it to be. Biology is irrelevant. If you're a girl in a gym class in junior high school and there's a boy whose gender identity is female, you're a bigot if you say anything about that boy going into the locker room and showering and changing with the girls, because gender is only a construct in your mind. Biology is irrelevant. It has nothing, and all the permutations of this happen. And the irony is what they're doing actually undoes what Congress intended. Because you know who's winning now in states where this is happening? You know who's winning the women's track meets? The men who have a female gender identity. You know who's going to start taking the college scholarships at the public universities? The men who have a woman gender identity. And so when the Supreme Court accepted our case, it's going to be argued this fall. The question will be, does federal law include gender identity in the meaning of the word sex? I think there's a good chance the Supreme Court is going to say, no, that's not what Congress meant in 1964 when they passed that law, which means this issue may fall smack into the presidential election. Boy, won't that be an interesting thing to see. But this is the point. I'll close with this. When we represented, it was the Hobby Lobby case before the U.S. Supreme Court. It was our client, Conestoga Wood in Hollywood. You can come up. I'm closing with this for whatever time you want to give for questions. The federal government had a view that you must provide all types of abortifacient, that we say, contraception, including abortifacients. When Hobby Lobby said, we'll provide health coverage, but we are not going to provide abortifacient coverage, the federal government at that time, a different administration, said, no, we decide what the important values are. Your faith in the marketplace is unimportant. We have the government orthodoxy, and this is the way it's going to work. When we say you have to provide these abortifacients, you have to comply with it. Your conscience is irrelevant if it does not align with the new government orthodoxy. It's exactly the start of what I was talking about. And thanks be to God that the Supreme Court went the right way, and because of a wonderful federal law that we have, and said, no, 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 this is protection. You do not compel people to violate their conscience. So I think it's wonderful we are talking about the marketplace. I just want to say the attack on Christians is the most intense in the marketplace. Our florist in the state of Washington, Barronelle Stutzman, we're going back up to the Supreme Court because the Washington Supreme Court decided against her again after the Supreme Court sent it down. If she loses this case, they have sued her personally as well as her business. She will end up probably with over $1 million in between fees and fines and penalties because she declined a customer she had for 9 years whom she loved like a son. She's in her 70s. She served him with everything, but said to him, Rob, I can't be a part of celebrating your wedding and doing the floral arrangements. Here's 3 more florists who will do this wedding for you. And God bless you. And they hugged, and the Washington Attorney General went after her to make an example of her, to take away everything she owns and put her out of business because we don't want people of faith acknowledging a higher authority than the new government orthodoxy. And that's what's at stake in the marketplace cases that we're handling. So,
I want to make sure you guys know that if you are a member of USCAL, part of the membership benefits is to have a free 1-year subscription to or membership to the
we have a church alliance and we have a ministry alliance. We're pro bono. Everything we do is free. All our cases, all legal work is free. We do have a subscription service because there's too many churches for it. It's very reasonable. If you are a dues-paying member of USCAL, you will get a 1-year free membership. We'll review your church or nonprofit bylaws. If you're interested in that, find me afterward. Just go to ADF Legal, adflegal.org, and put in Church Alliance or Ministry Alliance. You'll see where to sign up, and I'll make sure that you get your first year. And it's not very expensive, but I'll make sure that your first year is free. Sorry.
And that's very important because many, many years ago, Joe coached me into what I should put in my bylaws to protect us from the new realities of culture. And he sent me 7 different things. I don't know, it's probably 10 now, and helped me with the language and all of that. And this is no game. And do you guys also defend? You do defend businesses. But
yeah. So we have plenty of businesses, professionals. I mean, we have many cases going on at any time. In fact, this week we'll be arguing a case. We're representing an Orthodox Jewish counselor. We're suing New York City because there's a law that says he cannot speak to other adult Orthodox Jews who want help with unwanted same-sex attraction or gender confusion. They're cases for businesses. We have our florist, we have a videographer case in line, we have a T-shirt manufacturer, we have many, many businesses where there's either artistic expression or speech where they don't want to create a message that celebrates an event like a pride festival or something where it violates their faith, yes. And if there are people who fit that category, we're happy to talk to you.
Right, but there's no membership for non-churches.
No, there is. There's a membership for Christian ministries, too.
Oh, okay.
There are 2 of them. There's a church one and a Christian ministry one.
Okay. Yeah, rather than give it to the audience because we're running out of time, I'll just ask a few questions. Then you guys connect offline or go on the ADF website. But some general questions that a lot of people have is two questions I'll go with. One is, do you believe that the present makeup of the Supreme Court is really in our favor, given some of the compromises we've seen with Judge Roberts and others?
It's hard to know. I will say it is definitely a better Supreme Court I think, for our issues with Justice Kavanaugh replacing Justice Kennedy. There are conservative judges or justices who will go in ways that don't seem to be conservative because they have principles. My favorite justice on the court is Justice Thomas, and I love his jurisprudence. There are times that he's just got views of certain things. Justice Roberts was the vote for upholding Obamacare, but I understand why he did it. You're going to occasionally see Gorsuch or Kavanaugh or something, but on these issues and Congress having to be the one to pass these kinds of laws and not judges, I think the Supreme Court is going to be favorable.
Okay. And how are the states changing abortion laws, even though Roe v. Wade is still the law of the land?
Yeah, and watch, because this is the area of really dramatic divide. You will see, I think, sheep states and goat states, somebody was describing it to me earlier. You will see more and more very pro-life laws. You'll see the New York type laws and Virginia, and what Virginia tried to do, what New York did. My best guess, I don't think that this is a court that's got a mind to overturn Roe v. Wade. The court is sensitive to the culture. I think the question will be, will there be more limitations on abortion, more restrictions, as we continue to progress toward a culture that better understands life, that understands children survive when they're born prematurely, that gets the idea of a heartbeat or fetal pain or whatever. And don't be discouraged by the Supreme Court declined a case out of Indiana. And some people were saying, oh, look, they're not. Well, you have to understand what the Supreme Court did. There was an Indiana law that banned sex-specific abortions and race-based abortions. And the Supreme Court didn't say, no, we won't hear laws like that. What they said is, this is a new kind of issue. There's a lot of these. We're taking no position, but we want these to go through legislatures. We want this to percolate so we can get a better understanding what courts are doing. And to make the point, Justice Thomas, did I mention he's my favorite justice? Wrote a stirring opinion. You can find it. It's called Planned Parenthood versus Box. You'll find it online, where he said, get what we're saying here. We're not saying that we don't want these cases. We want these. And he talked about, he went to a history of eugenics and who Margaret Sanger was and how sex and race-based abortions are real things. How Margaret Sanger advocated for those things because she had views on who were unfit to live. That the eugenicists thought we should kill people who were deaf or blind or who were born into poverty. And it's shocking how when the mind discards the belief in God and the inherent dignity of the human being, the things that will come. We should not be surprised by any of them. And he wrote this stirring opinion, and he said, these are real things. Sex-based abortions, look at the tragedy that's happened in Asian nations. Who gets aborted there? Women get aborted there. In a nation like China, for a long time, suffered under the horrible one-child policy. Women were being aborted. There's a woman shortage. So I think you're going to see more and more of these abortion cases going before the Supreme Court. There's another one out of Indiana. There's quite a few of them. My guess is that the court will take gradually cases restricting abortion a little more. What's going to happen eventually with Roe v. Wade is hard to say. It's very much printed in the American psyche. I will say if Roe v. Wade was overturned, it returns the decisions to the states. The last count I looked at, I think probably close to half the states would immediately find a right to abortion under their state Constitution. It's a question of how far the federal government goes.
Well, let's give Joe a hand. Thank you so much, Joe. Very informative. Praise God. What a blessing he is. He's counsel for USCAL, gives us a lot of advice, and what a deep personal friendship we have, and very prophetic man as well. So there's a real pastoral prophetic side of him, not only the lawyer, but there's a real powerful gift inside of him, and that's been a blessing to me many, many times. I pay him $15 an hour for therapy, so it's just incredible. But we're going to end this USCAL conversation with a word from the Lord, and my friend Bart Pierce. I want to read his bio because I had to read my son's bio, so I might as well read Bart's bio. Bishop Bart Pierce is a powerful prophetic voice and the senior pastor and founder of Rock City Church in Baltimore, Maryland. RCC has experienced several revivals that have deeply affected thousands of people from all over the world, and their church also facilitates many holistic programs that have impacted the inner city of Baltimore. RCC presently trains hundreds of young people every year through their Compassion Commission. And we send 30 young people every year, and they come back to Compassion Commission. They come back totally transformed. Bart and I have been walking together since 1995, and what a very trusted friend, prophetic voice. He and Harry Jackson are two of the key prophetic voices into me personally and into USCAL. And I always tell Bart I want him to end the conference in case the first part of it was a bomb. At least we know to end up okay. So, but thank God, it's been great. And so I want Bishop Bart Pierce to come up. Let's just give him a hand. He's a walking revival. Just carries the presence of God. Hold on to your seats. And after he ministers, of course, as the Lord leads him, we usually have prophetic ministry, impartation for people, especially the young leaders. Thank you, Bart.